Welcome everyone to this bonus episode of Monday Match Analysis powered by BetUS. I'm Gill Gross, reacting to earth-shaking news in the tennis world this morning. Rafael Nadal took to social media and posted his retirement announcement video. Davis Cup at the end of this season will be his last as a professional tennis player, and no matter how expected, no matter how inevitable days like this are, it doesn't make it any less emotional, any less impactful. So there's plenty to get into on that front, of course. And I'll also do a little bit of Shanghai towards the end. Talk about where we stand right now in that Masters 1000 tournament. One of the two semifinals set, couple of quarterfinals yet to be played tonight. I'll get into all of that somewhat briefly, but we'll cover some stuff there. Rafa. I want to start by just talking about the loss that Nadal's exit will represent. And it's really hard to put something that large into sufficient words, but that's really how you know a player is great. And I know great is a word, it's thrown around a lot, but there's a certain level of specialness that is so clearly irreplaceable when it comes to some of these greats. And you know what I'm talking about. There are so many things about Rafa Nadal that we'll never see again. We'll never get to enjoy again in real time. And that's the sad reality. I know I'm not cheering anybody up right now. Anybody who's sad about the news and reminiscing on all the great times that they've had with Nadal being a part of this sport. But that's what greatness is. You know, it's a special factor. It's irreplaceable. And there are a lot of aspects to Nadal that I put in this category of, completely one of a kind and something that I'm always going to miss enjoying and watching. And, I'll start with what I would describe as a perfectly calibrated competitive nature. He was an extremely, and I'm going to do all of this in past tense, even though there's a little bit more Nadal left to go. Davis Cup and the Six Slams exhibition, I think, are the two times that we'll see Nadal on a tennis court, at least as a competitive professional. The competitive nature, it is so difficult to have that level of fire and determination and, none of the negativity that goes along with it. So he was incredibly positive on the court, yet played with a ton of emotion. And normally you associate emotion with roller coaster, a lot of ups, a lot of downs, and you kind of ride these waves and these peaks and valleys. Nadal had something so rare as to play with a ton of emotion, but to basically keep it, not that he'd never get upset when he expected more out of himself, but to really keep his energy, which was an immense amount of energy, a ton of energy, keep it going in the right direction in a way that was going to help him win matches. And that, of course, materialized in a level of effort on a point in and point out basis that was outstanding. Something that everybody who plays the sport strives to achieve. There's the whippiness of that lefty forehand, sort of a redefinition of how we think about topspin, what we think the limits of topspin can be. And I think as we continue in the era of violent racket speed, lighter rackets, polyester strings, we're going to see more and more of the heavy RPM, but Nadal he's like the godfather of heavy RPM. Not that he was the first. I know any tennis historian would be upset at any indication that Nadal was somehow, the first to utilize heavy topspin, but he certainly pushed it to brand new limits. And the way he used margin and height really, really broke new ground. And the aesthetic of that lefty forehand and the weapon that it was no one has been able to emulate that since. And I'm sure if it was at all possible to emulate, there are tons of players out there who would have loved to have been able to do it. But it was a very, very special shot. There's the athleticism. He started obviously as a teenager, he was smaller, and there was immediately that jitterbug quickness. But with that jitterbug quickness that was maintained, eventually also became this bruising strength. An athlete who is simultaneously strong as an ox and also quick as a cat. And, one of the most imposing and intimidating physical players of all time. I don't think you can talk about the physicality and the athleticism without also discussing the longevity against all the odds, because he proved everyone wrong. Everyone. I don't know. He may have even proven himself wrong. I'm not sure. But I think he probably did. But with the physicality that I just described and the effort level that I described earlier, there was obviously a widespread assumption that Nadal's time was going to be somehow limited by his style of play, or even just by the clear trend that was sustained throughout his career of a guy who got injured a lot. He missed a lot of slams. I had that number written down somewhere. I don't memorize it, though. He's missed a lot of slams in his career, and he rarely went from January to November without sustaining an injury and missing tournaments at some point along the way. And I think one of the what should be said about that is one of the hardest things about being a pro tennis player. As much as us on the sidelines envy the life of someone who gets to hit a ball around and make millions of dollars, you have the travel, but there's probably nothing that sucks more than getting hurt. There's probably nothing harder in this game than having to rehab and come back from injuries. And that's something that even non-tennis players can relate to. Anyone who's had a serious surgery or a serious injury knows that rehab sucks. It's no fun at all. And Nadal had to pick himself up off the mat so many times. Really, an almost incomprehensible number of times he was willing to go into the trenches and to recover from injury after injury after injury. And I don't think it was ever easy for him, but he was always willing to put in those hard yards. And somehow it didn't deter him, because for most, I think it would fry most players. It would break the will. It would make it very hard for a player to continue to improve as a player. And Nadal was able to achieve an incredible amount of longevity against the odds and maintain an elite level of play despite a lot of setbacks with the body. I also want to say that for all the things that Rafa is known for, whether it be the physicality, the forehand, he honored every part of the game from a technical standpoint, to the point where the things that he's not known for are largely underrated, whether it be his backhand, amazing backhand. But what about his hands? His hands were amazing. Once Roger Federer retired, John McEnroe would always say that he believes that Nadal is the best volleyer on the tour. And I think he had a good argument there. I think it very well could have been true. I would not argue with it. Save for maybe some technical arguments about how selective Nadal would be about when to come forward, therefore not putting himself in a position on a very regular basis in which he had to hit difficult volleys. But when it came to just executing on the volleys, I don't know who I would trust more than Nadal, especially in the latter stages of his career, because he had the softest hands you could have. A master of the drop volley, an incredibly reliable forehand drop shot to go along with sort of the threat of the power that he possessed in that forehand. But it's a larger point about the fact that Nadal, is a player who has very definable strengths. And I guess I would add, forehand physicality, mentality. Those are probably the three pillars of what people think about when it comes to Nadal as a player. There's just a lot of other stuff. There's a well-roundedness there. Serve never really became a weapon, but there's a well-roundedness there in all aspects of his game. It's really impressive. Not to mention, I think tactically, his feel, his awareness, his shot selection, off the charts. And I want to end with something less specific to the court, at least end this part of it, with his human side, which is not something that I tend to harp on because, I consider myself an outsider when it comes to these sorts of things. I'm not in the locker room. I don't pretend to know these people. I try not to make a ton of moral judgments about these people, good or bad, unless they give me, an obvious window into certain things. And, on-court behavior is on-court behavior. You can call it for what it is. I don't think it always represents how these people are off the court. I will share one thing that I know about Nadal. I know it's something that he does, and it's something that I admire very much. When Rafa is eliminated from a tournament, I've also seen this. I've seen footage of it. When Rafa is eliminated from a tournament, he goes into the tournament offices and he finds the referees. He finds the organizers, the people who do the practice schedules, the people who mediate the media relations, anybody who's in the offices. And what he likes to do before he leaves the tournament is he shakes everybody's hands and he says thank you. He shakes as many hands as possible and he says thank you. And that's what he does before he leaves. And I think that speaks volumes as someone who knows the impact that simple gesture of kindness can leave, knows that none of it is possible without these people. It shows a lack of ego, frankly, to be able to thank the people who make it happen. And it's easy to do that after winning. But the fact that Rafa would so often do that after losing, that he would, despite feeling however he felt at the time, he would go out of his way to just say thank you before leaving the particular stops on the tour. Something that I wanted to share because it's something that stuck in my mind. He spent most of his video saying thank yous as well. Not unique to Rafa, but he thanked the tennis industry. He thanked his rivals. He thanked his team. He thanked his mother, his wife, his uncle, his sister, and lastly, the fans. In that video, he alluded to the difficulty he's had with his body. He said, quote, "I don't think I've been able to play without limitations the last 2 years." And he announced that Davis Cup would be the last chapter. Let me get more into the news part of it, all right? I am not surprised. I suspected this might be coming. If you want to go in the time machine and get my thoughts before this announcement came out, I did record an episode of 3 with Joel Drucker and Amy Lundy a couple of days ago, and we openly discussed the possibility that the Davis Cup in Malaga might be the final stop. I'll tell you, I felt like something was a little bit off, that something was brewing, and that Nadal had a difficult decision in front of him because I noticed that when he pulled out of the U.S. Open, he did not cite injury. And when he pulled out of Laver Cup, he did not specifically cite injury. And I felt at that time, it's one of two things. Either he's lost the desire to play at this time, or he just doesn't want to share the injury. There is one, and he doesn't want to share it. It's one of those two things. And I still don't really know what it is, but it told me that he was not at peace. Rafa was not at peace, at the very least, with the current state of how things were going. And of course, at the start of 2024, he said this was probably going to be his last year. And he continued to leave the door open throughout even the clay court season. He said, I haven't said for sure that I'm done after this year. But then you take a step back and you look at, okay, what was this year like? What would have been the things that would have encouraged Rafa to keep going? And did they happen? And at the end of the day, I think objectively speaking, Nadal didn't play well enough this year or stay healthy enough this year in order to maintain a realistic belief that he could achieve satisfactory results if he continued. That's the first thing. And the second thing is that he said at the start of the year that he didn't want to end his career in a press conference, essentially saying, when I retire, I want it to be playing tennis. I want to be able to play tennis and say goodbye playing tennis. I don't want to say, I got injured and now I'm retired. And I totally get that. It's not a nice way to go out, to have to go out with an injury. It's not a nice way to go out, sometimes unavoidable, many times unavoidable. But I totally got that desire. The fact was, for Rafa, it became like pretty simple logic, right? If you keep playing inevitably, that is how your career will end. And in that sense, I wanted for Nadal to achieve his goal of not ending his career in a press conference and therefore set a finish line. There's an interesting dynamic at play with Nadal because one of his calling cards has always been a willingness to suffer. And it's helped him on the tennis court, and it's helped him coming back from all of these injuries, and it's helped him become the athlete that he became. You have to be willing to suffer. If you never push yourself to the limit, you'll never be great. Nadal knew that. He's always willing to suffer. But at the same time, it's got to be worth it. It has to be worth the suffering. And I think playing became very difficult these last 2 years. It would have potentially been worth it. It would have potentially been worth battling through had Rafa had any evidence that there were fruitful outcomes that were sort of achievable had he gone through all the suffering required to play tennis, to continue to play tennis. But at the end of the day, we saw over the course of the clay court season where thankfully he managed to stay healthy. And he ends this 2024 season 12-7, a decent win rate by most standards, not by Rafa's standards. But even in his wins, it should not be so difficult for Nadal to beat Zizou Bergs or Mariano Navone or Pedro Cachin or a post-prime Martin Fucsovics on a clay court. All of those matches were exceptionally difficult. And while there is no shame in losing to Alexander Zverev at Roland Garros, especially the way he was playing, no shame in losing to Novak Djokovic at the Olympics, especially the way he was playing, Rafa wasn't able to keep those matches as competitive as he would have liked. And having stayed healthy, having got the reps in, how can you continue to believe moving forward that you can achieve the things that you want to achieve when you can't keep those matches competitive? Rafa deserves to stop suffering at this point. Sentiment that I thought was written very well in a USA Today column by Dan Wolkin. And I don't know that there is anything left. I'm sure there was nothing left. And that's why if you're Rafa or if you're a Rafa fan, you go to sleep tonight feeling fulfilled, feeling satisfied. I hope Rafa feels satisfied. He deserves to feel satisfied because there is nothing left. He extracted everything possible out of his body and his career. And this is a commonality. I was thinking about this with Nadal, and it made me realize something. We get infatuated with this idea of leaving on your own terms. I want to leave on my own terms. And this is nothing against players who have the privilege of leaving on their own terms. Whoever's able to do that, good for those players. It's the ideal circumstance. But, there is something to be said for what's happened with Federer and Murray and Nadal. Did they leave on their own terms? I don't think so. I think the desire to keep playing was so strong for all three of them that none of them were able to leave on their own terms. That would have never happened. Because if they left on their own terms, that would mean that they had something more to give. And none of them did. Federer's knee was incapacitated. Murray could not move. He could not play. One more singles match was too much to ask for Andy Murray. And Nadal's body, it's been screaming at him to stop for 2 years now. So it's a commonality with all of them. They didn't leave on their own terms because they had nothing left to give. I am hopeful, however, for a great send-off at Davis Cup. Cautiously hopeful. Now, I'm worried about a couple of things. I am a little bit worried that Rafa isn't going to want to play singles because he is going to be nervous that he'll compromise Spain's chances to win. I really hope that he can see that, with all due respect to the great competition that is the Davis Cup, Spain collectively, his captain David Ferrer, his teammates, all of the Spanish fans, I'm quite certain, would much rather have Rafa Nadal, give Rafa Nadal the perfect send-off, whatever it takes to do that, if it means perhaps they're not able to win another Davis Cup. Talk about nothing left to give. Nadal has won 5 Davis Cup titles. Spain has won 6 since the turn of the century. They won once without Nadal in the year 2000. And I think there's a lot to like about Malaga as an ending point for Rafa. Nadal's big splash, and he alluded to this in his retirement video, his first big splash was when he won Davis Cup in 2004. He was 18 years old. It was in Seville. Incredible environment, atmosphere. And he beat Andy Roddick, who was number 2 in the world. Nadal ushered and led Spain through a golden era of their tennis. Spain became the dominant force of the 2000s and the 2010s. And Rafa individually at Davis Cup. And this is underrated, somewhat underlooked. What if I told you his win rate at Davis Cup is the same as it is at Roland Garros? 97%, 29-1. And by luck of the draw, maybe we can thank Piqué for this. Spain happens to be the host of the Davis Cup Finals, which will give Nadal the ability to say goodbye in Spain. What a treat. Not only that, It will give Nadal a chance to say goodbye with his Spanish teammates by his side. The next generation in Carlos Alcaraz, someone who was alongside him throughout basically his entire career in David Ferrer, and I'm sure many, many more. But there has been something rewarding and something beautiful for these players. I'll go back to Roger Federer, who said goodbye at Laver Cup, and Andy Murray, who said goodbye at the Olympics. There is something to having people by your side so it's not so lonely when you are done. And Rafa will have that. I'm going to leave it at that. Gracias, Rafa, siempre. Shanghai, we've got one semifinal set. We were one match away from another Sinner versus Alcaraz, but Tomas Machac said, no, sir. He defeats Carlos Alcaraz. We'll talk about that match. It was another Jannik Sinner, Daniil Medvedev quarterfinal. We've seen a lot of those in the last year. And for the most part, with the exception of Wimbledon, Jannik Sinner has been able to get through this particular head-to-head. He does so again in Shanghai. We'll discuss that. And then brief comments on what are a couple of quarterfinals yet to be played. We have Jakub Mensik versus Novak Djokovic, Taylor Fritz versus David Goffin. Shanghai is the toughest time zone in the world for me. Frankly, I think that's no hyperbole. I think of all the time zones that exist on planet Earth, I don't think there's a more difficult one than Shanghai, China. And therefore, I've been playing catch up on these matches. I've, in some cases, been watching a lot of extended highlights, which I can watch on Tennis TV. They do a great job of posting these 20-minute long highlight videos. And I'll use that to kind of parlay into a sort of an announcement. I now have an affiliate link for Tennis TV, which means if you'd like to purchase a subscription to Tennis TV and at the same time support the channel, use my link in the description and you will be able to kill those two birds in one stone. Again, you use my link to purchase a Tennis TV subscription, and you, in doing so, will support the channel. It only works if you have not previously signed up for Tennis TV. All right? So I wanted to say that. Of course, as Shanghai rolls around, BetUS can be your betting home for the Shanghai Masters. We thank BetUS for powering Monday Match Analysis. Currently, you can go to betus.com and use the promo code YouTube150 for an 150% deposit bonus up to $2,000. Please gamble responsibly and don't harass the players. One last bit of housekeeping. I did post a new video on the channel, which was the latest edition of The Point, which is a video series where I break down just one point using real footage, and that point was either really interesting or really important, and I break it down. It's a shorter video. It's not available on audio, only on YouTube. There was a bit of a copyright issue with that video initially. It's since been resolved, but the YouTube algorithm has really hammered me. It's not recommending the video at all because of the issue that there was with the copyright. So I just wanted to announce that that video is up and live and you can watch it, just because YouTube is not really doing its thing to recommend it. I just want to make it known that it is out there and available. And I'll put it as an end screen after this video so that you can click on that and enjoy it after this one. All right. Moving on. Let's start with Tomas Machac, biggest win of his career. A redemptive performance for Machac, because he played Alcaraz at Davis Cup just a few weeks ago and won the first set and was in the driver's seat and very oddly began cramping. And I don't know if it's on record what was happening with Team Czechia at Davis Cup, because it seemed like there was something going on with Lehechka, and Machac cramped at the start of the second set on an indoors, which is strange. Like, it's just not normal. I think there was maybe an illness going around the team or something of that nature, but I don't have that confirmed. But it was unfortunate because, Machac was in a great position to pull off a really big win, and the body just totally went out on him. Lo and behold, a few weeks later, he's able to put himself in the same position and this time finish the deal. Machac won this match by playing hyper aggressive. It's on theme with a lot of the conversations that we've been having, both on Monday Match Analysis after the Beijing final and in the mailbag to follow, just wondering aloud about if Sinner could have tilted the scales in his favor just slightly by being a little bit more proactive, taking on some higher risk profiles by trying to hit a bit bigger, rushing Alcaraz more, making him defend more, and not being as accepting of neutrality. Machac was go big or go home the entire match. And one of the things that was so impressive about his performance is it did not matter what the scoreboard said. He played the same way the entire match. You can look at the first set tiebreak, 6-5. All the chips are down here. 6-5 point. He hits a perfect spot serve down the tee, his best serve, slice tee to Alcaraz's forehand. And Alcaraz does the right thing, trying to put some air under the return. Machac says, I'll take this early on the rise, and I'll hit it huge. And he goes inside in. And then again, Alcaraz is trying to defend. So what's he going to do? He's going to put some air under the ball. He's trying to recover his position. And Machac steps inside the court, offers the perfect counter to somebody trying to defend with height, and he takes the next ball out of the air with the forehand drive volley, which he smokes for a winner. 3 swings of the racket by Machac. All of them had deadly intention. And that's in the biggest moment of the match, highest leverage situation. So Machac was hyper aggressive all match long with his court position, with his ball speed, with his net rushing, where he was something like 19 for 20 at the net. And he was beating Alcaraz to the punch often. Even on first serve returns, he was aggressive. And Alcaraz kept missing into his forehand, seemingly. And these conditions are really quick. If you are able to play a suffocating offensive style, it's not going to be easy for anybody to handle that. And Alcaraz was doing a lot of scrambling at the end of the day. That's what was necessary for Machac. In general, I want to say about the young Czech, there have been multiple times this season where I've been in awe of his level. It hasn't been all year long, right? Otherwise, we'd be talking about a more dominant season for Machac. But there have been moments throughout this year where I've thought, oh my goodness, this is unplayable stuff. From a guy who has very good foot speed, who volleys extremely well, who transitions with regularity, whose two-hander is as deadly as it comes, particularly for a guy of his stature. He's not the tallest guy. He's not a one-hander. Sometimes the one-handers hit it a little bigger. No, he's a two-hander who's not all that big, but the ball comes off his racket like he's, I don't know, like Marat Safin. It's pretty unbelievable. And I think it's because of how active that left arm is in the backhand. It's almost like he's hitting a lefty forehand. It's a spectacular two-hander. His serve and his forehand are more precision shots. Now, I've never seen him hit the forehand as big as he did in this match against Alcaraz. Never seen him hit it like that. But one of the things that I admire so much about the forehand is, despite the fact that maybe it's not the heaviest forehand you'll ever see, he has the gift of timing. And maybe part of it is technique, the simplicity of his take back, the simplicity of his swing. But man, it feels like he can pull a down the line forehand out of nowhere. He doesn't need a weak ball. He doesn't need a short ball. He can find that forehand down the line. And that's unsettling for opponents, especially because it's pretty difficult to read where he's going with his forehand. And if you take the ball early and you take the ball down the line, you do those two things really well. You don't need to hit the ball that hard, particularly not when you're playing in Shanghai and the court is going to give you extra help. So that's the forehand. The serve, it's got a lot of slice on it and he locates it. And I still think the most effective serve against Alcaraz is a slice serve into his forehand where, sometimes he can drop that forehand return a little bit short. And Machac was doing a great job of being deadly on the +1. The last thing I'll add is Machac has this knack for passing shots. Whenever I'm watching him, he's just making passing shots. Some players just love a target, and I think he's one of those guys. It's pretty phenomenal. Again, precision. The guy is a precise ground stroker. And he's not massaging the ball either. I really, really like him. And he played outstanding in this match. Not much to worry about from Alcaraz's perspective. Again, the big points didn't go his way. Machac played the big points very, very well. Maybe there is some fatigue setting in at this point. I thought before the tournament that there would be. And the one thing I'll note for Alcaraz is when he lost in Cincinnati in New York, he looked distressed. He was out on court looking as if he was, really down on himself, like he was searching for himself. This was a totally different looking Alcaraz. He looked pretty calm. He looked like he was enjoying the process of competing, like he was somewhat satisfied with the level that he was playing at. And it just, to me, signals that Alcaraz, despite the loss, is in a pretty good place right now. But credit to Machac for an incredible performance. Sinner over Medvedev. So first of all, coming into this match, Medvedev says he hates the balls. He says they're too slow. He is really struggling to keep his composure on the court at times because he hates the balls so much. And he is a condition-sensitive guy. Like, I've never seen a player in my life get so upset over the conditions on such a regular basis. These are the Wilson All Courts. They are balls that are not available in the United States, so I've never played with them. But he basically said that they get too slow, and Sinner and Alcaraz are the only guys who can produce penetration through the court with these balls. So now he has to play Jannik Sinner. Comments like that coming into a matchup against the guy doesn't necessarily inspire confidence. He's literally saying early in the tournament, he's like, yeah, only Sinner and Alcaraz can play well with these balls. And there's Sinner on the other side of the net. Turns out his shoulder was bothering him too. That didn't help. It's gotten to the point with Medvedev's shoulder that I think if you are a Daniil Medvedev fan, you got to wonder if it's better for him to just take a second here. Take a breather, shut it down the rest of the season, see if you can get it healthy for 2025. Because even though I asked Medvedev straight up at the U.S. Open, is your shoulder a problem? And he looked me in the eyes and said, no, it was an issue during the clay court season, but I'm good now. I don't know if he was lying or not, but it just seems like this thing is lingering on him. It really does seem that way. And he was honest after this match that it was a problem. And he got outserved pretty badly again. Sinner, 36% unreturned serves. Medvedev, 18.5% unreturned. Medvedev got out-aced 9-3 by Jannik. Forehand might have affected Medvedev on the forehand as well. Sinner had 16 forehand winners. Medvedev had 5. And Sinner was making less neutral unforced errors. So when you're making less neutral unforced errors and you're bringing more weaponry, it's trouble. You know who's winning that match. Medvedev did do some things in the second set to make things more physical. He started taking all the spin and the pace off of his forehand at times. It was very odd to watch. It was almost like junk ball-y. Bernard Tomic-like forehands. Some of them actually had backspin on it. Again, I don't know if he felt he needed to hit it that way because of his shoulder. I do think at times it was actually effective because he ended up playing with so much variety, intentionally or unintentionally. Started making more balls, but at the end of the day, he just couldn't damage Jannik. And given the shoulder and the balls that he was saying he couldn't do any damage with, you can't be all that much surprised. So you could hear all those things and say, okay, you'll write it off. Forget the match, forget the result, whatever. Chalk it up to injury, bad conditions, whatever. But at the end of the day, I'm seeing a lot of the same stuff every time Sinner and Medvedev play. And I think the trends in this head-to-head are really concerning because yet again, Sinner did not go to the net a ton, did not drop shot a ton. He didn't do either of those things more than he usually does. He did slice his backhand a little bit more than normal. But was that because Medvedev was giving him that weird junk ball to his backhand that stayed really low? I don't know. The point is, Sinner felt like the superior baseliner. He felt like he could stay in his comfort zone, trade from the back of the court, and win. And he was correct again. And one of the reasons why I used to give Medvedev so much respect, and I still do, but one of the things that I used to point out when it came to Daniil was that you had to change your game in order to play with him. It didn't matter if you were Novak Djokovic, because when Novak didn't change his game and tried to play Medvedev, they ended up getting into these really close physical wars. Wasn't until Djokovic started mixing things up where he started to make some separation in the head-to-head. Sinner, same thing. He had to change his game in order to play Medvedev. Alcaraz, you'd see way more serve and volley, even more drop shots, lots of serve plus one approach. And that was an admission that Medvedev is so good as a baseliner that you have to do certain things in order to overcome him. And now, I'm not seeing that anymore. I'm seeing these guys think, all right, I can beat Medvedev from the baseline. That's what Jannik Sinner has been doing against Medvedev in recent meetings. Wimbledon at this point, where Daniil got the better of things, right now it feels like a real outlier. Jakub Mensik versus Novak Djokovic. I'm going to be really short on these quarterfinal matches yet to be played. Mensik, great run from him. He beat Dimitrov. He beat Rublev. It's actually the second time he's beaten both of those players. Obviously, he's still very, very young. But if you look at his top 10 resume right now, he is 4-1 to start his career against top 10 players, with the 2 wins against Rublev and Dimitrov each. Then you have the one loss. That was back in January against Hubert Hurkacz at the Australian Open. 5-setter. So 5 matchups against top 10 players, and he wins 4 of them, and the other one he goes to 5. It's pretty good signs early on for my number 1 overall pick in the 23 and under draft. As for Novak, he has looked dominant in his last 2 matches. The Alex Mickelson first round match was tight, but last 2 have been very straightforward against Flavio Caboli and Roman Safulin. These are the kind of conditions that, skills can kind of take over and physicality can be de-emphasized. I'm not convinced yet about Novak from what I've seen. I have trouble gauging exactly where he's at, but certainly the serve and the forehand are firing. We saw at Wimbledon when he made the final, in many different conditions, just those 2 shots at their full capacity can take Novak very, very, very far. So that's what I'll say right now. And I'm looking forward to Mensik versus Djokovic. Fritz versus Goffin is the other semifinal. I did want to go in a little bit more depth about Taylor Fritz beating Holger Rune 6-1, 6-2, because I feel that was a notable result. before I say everything I'm about to say, I do want to mention that Rune has been very good the last couple weeks as a whole. He's been very good. And this is just a bad day out of nowhere. But I find this happens a lot. I found this happened after a great semifinal run in Cincinnati. And I'm thinking, new coach, semifinal run. You head into the U.S. Open, a chance to really salvage your season. I thought Holger was going to be locked and loaded for the U.S. Open, and he lost in straight sets to Brandon Nakashima, 2-1 and 4. And I'm thinking to myself, after yet another 6-1, 6-2 straight set loss, boy, Rune gets blown out a lot. Against Jan-Lennard Struff in Munich, he lost 2 in love. In Miami against Marozsan, he lost 1-1. Twice this year, he's retired down a set in 4-1. Coric in Montpellier, Fils in Hamburg. I was calling that match against Fils in Hamburg, and honestly, the retirement kind of came out of nowhere, and I think his left wrist was bothering him, but he had been playing through it for the many, many events before then, and to me, it was kind of a bit of a rage quit. You go back even last year, semifinals of Basel versus Felix. It's another match that I remember quite well. 3-2. Not quite as lopsided, but I felt that was a bit of a no-show. So I think he's too good a player for that. I don't think he should take as many lopsided defeats as he has. And for me, there can be two explanations. One, either he's been having a ton of physical issues and he plays through them very often, and it leads to these bad performances. Or that's the generous reading of it. The less generous reading of it is he has a bad habit of no-showing. He has a bad habit of having these days in the office where he just doesn't have it at all. And it's something that, the best players are admirably able to generally avoid. I mean, how often have we heard? We've heard all of the greats say this. We've heard so many of the best tennis minds say that what makes the best players the best is that they're able to win on their bad days, not their good days, because everybody plays well on their good days. I also want to point out that Rune has regressed against top 20 competition now for 3 straight years. He was 11-9 in 2022. He was 7-12 in 2023. He is 2-9 this year against top 20 players. And in this match, I saw the signs of someone who just wasn't fully engaged in what they were doing. He was taking very little time between points. His footwork was sluggish in between shots. He was making some bad decisions. He was serve and volleying off of some weaker serves, which for him is like the tell. I see it a lot from Holger. When he's not going well, he starts serve and volleying. And it rarely works out for him. Taylor Fritz was great. He was great. But it's besides the point. Because even with Taylor Fritz playing great, Holger Rune is a good enough player where he should at least have a somewhat competitive match. David Goffin will play Taylor Fritz in the quarterfinal. Goffin beats Alexander Zverev. First quarterfinal above 250 level in 2 years. First top 10 win in 2 years for the Belgian. And he is someone who has been grinding. He's been willing the last couple of years to play challengers, to put in the hard yards, to try to find a way back. And it is great to see all of that effort rewarded for, I think, a character in the sport who's really universally well liked. And I watched highlights of the match. I don't have much to say other than he seemed to be dictating quite a lot, Goffin. And he's another precision player who I think always likes to take the ball early and take the ball down the line a lot. And these courts are going to give you that extra speed where if you are a precision player, you're going to get a reward out of that. But ultimately, in the larger picture, when it comes to Alexander Zverev, I've been uninspired by what I've seen from him physically for the last 2 or 3 months. And in that respect, I'm not all that surprised. So that is your Shanghai rundown. I will speak to you again on next week's edition of Monday Match Analysis for the final. Once again, thank you to BetUS. Hope you enjoyed. Don't forget to subscribe, and I will see you next time.